Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ruchi Badola, Dean WII, to deliver the welcome address. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon. Mr. Raghu Kumar Kodali, Advisor, MOEFCC. Madam Ruchika Dharal, Deputy Secretary, MOEFCC. Experts from CSTEP, all present dignitaries, faculty colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very important stakeholder consultation on ecosystems and biodiversity chapter of India's National Adaptation Plan. As has just been said, that it is part of our commitment and UNCCD that we have to submit our National Adaptation Plan, and hopefully we are going to submit it by the end of this year. So if you look at the three challenges of the Anthropocene, which is climate change, biodiversity conservation, loss, and increasing human populations and their demand, the most important impact, the other two may be the causal factors, but the impacts are most demonstrated through the climate change impacts. And the national adaptation plans actually are trying to develop through the consultations, science and scientific knowledge base, and make plans which are inclusive, gender sensitive and implementable, and also have the strategies therein. And also try to identify the resources that we are going to find to adapt to, for this whole process, or implement the adaptation strategies. Terms like ecosystem-based adaptations, nature-based solutions, which appear to us mere jargons, when we are reading those papers or when we are reading the documents, have become a reality for all of us today. Because we do understand that the critical role of natural ecosystems in providing the human well-being. Now we cannot talk only about the goods that they provide, but now the services that they provide becomes extremely important. And two important services which need to be emphasized and which are, I think, critical or central to these national adaptation plan is, one, that they are the source of everything that humans need. But the second important service which has been undermined throughout globally and for which recognition has now come is the sink function of the natural ecosystems, or increasing the resilience and ability of the natural ecosystems to keep functioning as the sink for all the waste that is generated by humans, whether it is in form of the greenhouse gases that we emit, whether it is in terms of the other things that we do. And hence, it is very critical that our national adaptation plans are able to address these issues. Today, we have been talking about the poor people, the indigenous communities, the ecosystem dependent people, the ecosystem refugees. It is fine. Poverty is one part of it. The most challenging part of it is the climate change impacts, which are mostly felt and for the people who have the least adaptation capabilities and least possibility to have any mitigation strategies, and that is the poorest of the poor. That is the women who are living in these tropical poor countries, the coastal areas, and all these areas. So I think this adaptation, this whole consultation for strategizing our national adaptation plan is extremely critical. And I'm very pleased to see that we have senior experts here. We have the youth here who are going to actually see the impact of it much longer than we are. So I think it is very important that you contribute to it, you listen to what is being discussed, and provide your points of view in this strategy, because this is a consultation. So welcome once more, and wishing you all the best for a very fruitful consultation workshop. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm welcome and for setting the tone for the discussions ahead. To give us an overview of the National Adaptation Plan and its significance in India's climate policy framework, I now invite Mrs. Ruchika Dharal, Deputy Secretary, MOEFCC. Over to you.
Thank you. Shri Raghu Kumar Kodali from MOEFCC, Ruchi Madola ma'am from WII, all the participants in the room, the colleagues from C-STEP and all the experts. A very good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this important stakeholder consultation on the biodiversity sector for the National Adaptation Plan. I would want to sincerely thank the colleagues from WII and C-STEP for organizing this consultation and giving their valuable contribution to this national document, which is going to define the strategies that India is going to adopt in terms of adapting to climate change in the different sectors of the economy. All of us in the room here recognize the fact that climate change is no more a distant threat. It is something that is, that is something we are facing day in and day out, and it is a pressing reality ahead of all of us. It is impacting all the sectors of the economy, all the spheres of the ecosystems, all the components of the various regimes. So nothing that we can think of is actually not getting affected by climate change. If we talk about India specifically, we have experienced about 300 extreme events in last 5 years. So we can clearly see that the intensity and the frequency of the extreme weather events is increasing day by day. And India being specifically a biodiversity rich region with critical biodiversity hotspots spread across the country is specifically affected by climate change in the biodiversity sector. We have hundreds and thousands of animals and plant species, and with the projected increase in temperature in the coming decade, all these species are going to be threatened through various impacts that are happening due to climate change. The frequency and the severity of the forest fires is increasing, and these fires not only destroy the ecosystems but also accelerate the loss of species and contribute to greenhouse gas emissions directly. Meanwhile, since we are in Dehradun, it is important to talk about the fragile Himalayan ecosystem, which is experiencing changes in terms of glacier threats, destabilizing hydrology, increasing landslides, and threatening both forest health and livelihoods of millions of people who are dependent on this ecosystem. And this interconnected climate impact highlight the very urgency to come up with ecosystem-based approaches, which can be the core pillar of India's resilience strategy. India has had a very long legacy of environmental leadership, whether it was in the form of the Chipko movement that we had decades back, or some of the recent projects to conserve biodiversity, that is Project Dolphin, Project Tiger, and there are several such initiatives that we have taken for the conservation. But there needs to be a comprehensive national strategy that can give guidance to different stakeholders that are acting at their own level. Just to emphasize the fact and highlight the kind of commitment the government of India has on this sector, I would want to share that in the current budget of 25-26, about 450 crore has been allocated to integrated development of wildlife habitats. And this will be done through various centrally sponsored schemes. And not only at the national level, internationally also, India is committed to the various international agreements on conservation of biodiversity, including the Kunming-Montreal Protocol on Global Biodiversity Framework. As per KMGBF, the objective is to reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030, including the specific targets that that intend to achieve 30% conservation in the terrestrial and marine areas, restoring 30% of the degraded ecosystems, and integrating biodiversity conservation into the various sectoral planning and developmental activities. And to be able to bring down those targets, At the national level, recently in October 2024, India has submitted its National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and it is very much aligned with the principles and goals of KMGBF. And moving ahead on the similar lines and recognizing the climate challenges, we initiated the preparation of National Adaptation Plan. It is kind of a follow-up activity to the initial adaptation communication that we had submitted to UNFCCC in 2023. And as per the decisions of COP28, all the countries are required to have their adaptation plans in place by 2025. So going by that direction and also going by the need of the hour, the National Adaptation Plan is being prepared with the 9 priority sectors where biodiversity and forest is one of the key sectors. Additionally, there are certain cross-cutting themes that the NAP will be focusing on that include inclusion of gender aspects in all the strategization and planning that is required to be done, social inclusion, technology and innovation, and most importantly, private sector participation in some of the traditionally government specific sectors. So how can we bring in the private sector into such activities, and how can we make a business case out of these conservation activities? And in this process, we had a national consultation for the NAP in March this year, and the findings of the NAP and the feedback received during the NAP, where we presented the vulnerability assessment and also some of the approaches to identifying the sectoral strategies. Those inputs were taken into consideration, and specifically for the biodiversity and forest sector, we organized a Right Shop in New Delhi, where we were fortunate enough to have a kind contribution of the experts across the country, including the experts from WII. And following that sector-specific Right Shop, we also had a overall NAP workshop in the month of May. And we are kind of at the final stages of finalization of the NAP. But today's discussion is not only about validating a draft that we have at hand, but it is also about building a shared ownership and to bring in scientific legitimacy, refining our approach, and also ensuring that all the content that goes into this important national document reflects India's ecological realities, the climate risks, and also highlight effective strategies that have proven to be successful on the ground, and something that experts feel can be taken up at a large scale. I would want to highlight that the inputs from this consultation will be directly affecting the final document, and we recognize that all of the collective expertise that is present in the auditorium today is enormous, and we would want everyone to please contribute your expertise and your thoughts on this important subject, so that that can be directly incorporated in the final document that can help our plan translate into real action, especially for the most vulnerable communities and ecosystems around us, as highlighted by Badola Madam, that it is important to reach the poorest of the poor, and also the entities of the ecosystem that cannot fight for themselves. We need to fight for them. So that with that approach, I would request all of you to please contribute in your ways and help us have a document that can give guidance to various stakeholders across the country in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for highlighting the objectives and the direction of the NAP and its integration with the sectoral planning. Now, to formally open the session and share his valuable perspective, I request Mr. Raghu Kumar Kodali, Scientist GE and Advisor, MOFCC, to deliver the opening remarks. Sir.
Ruchi Badola Madam and my colleague Ruchika Dal and Director Ravindra Tiwari sir. And very good afternoon to everyone. I extend a warm regards, welcome to all stakeholders, government organizations, different research institutes, and youth civil society organizations for participating in consultation workshop. I am the chair of the working group. I thank Wildlife Institute of India for organizing this consultation workshop for this sector. I also acknowledge the CSTEP, our expert institute, for providing technical support in developing this chapter. I am also national focal point for CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. It is an important chapter for me also. The National Adaptation Plan is being prepared under the framework of UNCCC's Paris Agreement document guiding climate adaptation across India. It covers 9 key sectors and aims to reduce vulnerability, build resilience, integrate adaptation into national and subnational development planning through inclusive and gender-responsive approaches. Ecosystem and biodiversity is one of the 9 key sectors identified for India's National Adaptation Plan. Ecosystem and biodiversity is a priority sector because it forms the ecological foundation of human well-being, regulating climate, securing water, enriching soils, protecting coastal lines, and supporting livelihoods. As one of the world's mega drivers country, India biodiversity underpins our climate resilience, food security, long-term development goals. However, these ecosystems are increasingly vulnerable to climate change, facing degradation, invasive species, habitat fragmentation, shifting species pattern, and disrupted ecosystem functioning. The chapter on ecosystem biodiversity has been developed through a rigorous consultative workshop and evidence-based process, ensuring reflects national priorities and local realities. A series of stakeholder consultation technical meetings was held. Recently, a write-shop was held early 2025 April to finalize the inputs from various thematic working group members and different institutions and experts. The draft chapter outlines key strategic areas for adaptation, including ecosystem-based adaptation at landscape and seascape levels, restoration of degraded ecosystems such as wetlands, grasslands, mangroves, marine habitats, enhancing the ecological connectivity through biodiversity corridors, mainstreaming biodiversity and ecosystem services into development planning and promoting community step forward and traditional economic knowledge. India has prepared National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan and it was released in October 2024 at Cali, Colombia with 23 national biodiversity targets. Today's consultation is aimed at presenting the draft chapter developed through expert consultation, sharing insights from the vulnerability assessment to identify priority ecosystem and regions, mostly importantly, inviting your feedback on implementation challenges and acknowledge gaps. Your contribution will help to fine-tuning of the chapter, both scientifically, robustly, and practically, it can be implementable. That is important. We are writing the chapter, but the implementation is a major part. We are preparing National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan. Now we are in the implementation stage. We have to prepare the state biodiversity strategic action plans also. As a key stakeholders, your insights, feedback, policy implementation, and community engagement are critical to strengthening this chapter. You seek your inputs on region-specific vulnerabilities, ways to enhance local participation, traditional knowledge integration, alignment with state biodiversity action plans, and strategies for tracking, monitoring, and finalizing ecosystem-based adaptation. The stakeholder consultation is a vital step to validate and strengthen the chapter before it is finalized and incorporated into National Adaptation Plan. I once again thank WA and CSTEP and all experts involved in finalizing this chapter and their continued commitment to this process. I look forward to an engaging and productive discussion and to working together to ensure our ecosystem and biodiversity remain at the heart of India's adaptation responses. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful remarks that highlight both the urgent need and the promising opportunities in ecosystem-based adaptation strategies. Now, I invite Dr. Ruchi Badola, ma'am, to felicitate our guests with a token of appreciation. Now, we will be moving on to a technical session. Moving on to the technical session, we now have a joint presentation on the overview of the ecosystems and biodiversity chapter of the NAP. May I invite Dr. Indu K. Murthy, Principal Research Scientist and Sector Head at the Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, CSTEP, and Mrs. Aparna Sundaresan, Senior Analyst at CSTEP, to take us through the chapter.
The presentation is open. Great, thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah. Just switch it. Okay, cool. Thank you. Very good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very pleased to be here and having gotten this opportunity to actually share with you a document that's been put together over a period of 1 year through contributions from various experts within India. We are just the spokesperson, although we've been kind of leading in coordinating and trying to get all of this together. So a lot of people have contributed to this document at the end of the day. As you can see, these are people who work in various different ecosystems across India, and they've been instrumental in bringing this together. I think the vision of the National Adaptation Plan is something that's already been shared earlier, but just to kind of contextualize the way it's being put together, the primary goal is to make the ecosystem and biodiversity climate resilient. So given that, there are sub-objectives, and of course, given that the NBSAP is something, and there are these national biodiversity targets that have already been set, whether all of the various different ecosystems. So we're trying to see how do these align. The biggest problem when you actually kind of set up these different kind of plans is that there are conflicting goals many a time, which kind of falls through the gaps. So the endeavor of the group has been to try and see how do we actually align across these various targets that have already been set, and then try to kind of mainstream ecosystem-based adaptation into climate and developmental planning, basically to build resilience at the end of the day. So the various ecosystems that have been considered, of course, forest ecosystems, grassland, deserts, inland wetland ecosystems, and in coastal and marine, there are multiple subcategories also that have been put in together. And then the agri-ecosystems have also been included. But that said, I would also like to kind of speak to you about slightly about the chapterization. So the forest ecosystems has its own chapter by itself. So that's kind of treated as a full-fledged chapter, while all the other ecosystems, barring the agri-ecosystems, all go into the ecosystem and biodiversity chapter. And the agri-ecosystems, although it's alluded to in this particular chapter, a lot of the detailing actually gets in the agriculture chapter. So that's the way the entire NAP and the chapters have been structured. So each of the chapters, of course, MOFCC kind of circulated a specific template and structure, because when you're developing sectoral plans, there needs to be some commonality across the various sectors. It can't look very different. So a basic binding structure is there within which we've all tried to kind of put together. So the plan actually begins with describing the status of the ecosystem, each of those ecosystems and sub-ecosystems, looking at the policy landscape, whether there are laws, missions, programs, and then which are the institutions and organizations working in this particular space, And once that's done, then it gets into looking at what are the climate risks and vulnerabilities to each of the ecosystems. Now, we know there is a wealth of literature. For some, there is a dearth of literature, which is what we've flagged in the document also. So try to kind of compile everything that exists with respect to the various ecosystems and their vulnerabilities and risks that exist. And also, MOFCC instituted a primary study to actually conduct climate risk assessment for this particular sector. So there's been a risk assessment conducted, which is a primary assessment. So based on which the plan is what's been developed. I'll get into a little more detail subsequently. So once that's been done, then the set of strategies which are risk informed are suggested, and they're broadly bucketed into these 5 or 6 different things that you see on the slide out here. While there is a lot of detailing in a tabular form which gets in, which talks about hazard-specific adaptation strategies and action plans, including which institutions potentially are responsible to, whether it is short, medium, or long-term plan that could be implemented. And then, of course, the way forward is the concluding section at the end of the day. So what are these hazards that are considered in the primary assessment? So there is drought, flood, GLOF, rainfall-induced landslides, extreme heat and heat waves, because that's a common reality now, which all of the country is facing, sea level rise, cyclones, saltwater intrusion, and of course cloudbursts, lightning, thunderstorms, and hailstorms. All of these together are also considered. Now, the reason I put this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC risk assessment figure, is to kind of bring to everybody's attention that while we do talk about the adaptation, it's considering the climate risk. And the way IPCC defines it is that it's at the intersection of vulnerability, exposure, and the extreme hazard. So it's just not the hazard component. And I think Ms. Drull also actually pointed this out, and so did Dr. Badola, where they said, we need to look at the vulnerabilities, and we need to look at who we are actually kind of safeguarding. So one is the ecosystem itself, but the reality is that these ecosystems, a lot of people are dependent on these ecosystems. So there is a very fine interlinkage between the ecosystem, the services they offer, and the people who are dependent. So the health and well-being of the ecosystem, as well as the people dependent on the ecosystems, are very finely interconnected, and we've tried to kind of retain this in this as well. So the assessment, actually what's been done by an institution which was brought in for this particular work, is, they've looked at the current period, which is 1986 to 2005, using meteorological and other historical climate trends, IMD data. They've actually done a risk assessment. Subsequently, what's also been done by them is they've also assessed the risk in the future period under a moderate emission scenario, which is RCP 4.5 for 2026 to 2045. So that is the time period of assessment. So whatever we talk about is keeping in mind what the potential risk is going to be in the coming decades, and how do these systems need to adapt. So that's the way this entire document has been built through. So this is just a snapshot of the various risks. This is not all of the risks and all of the maps that's been generated, but just to kind of give a sample. As you can see, risk to forest fire. This is particularly the top panel is talking about the risks to the forest sector. As I said, that's a separate chapter by itself. And for all the other ecosystems, cumulatively together also, this assessment for, whether it is, the risk of drought, risk of flood, risk of fire, GLOF, everything has been done. So the lower panel gives you a sample snapshot of the risk assessment done considering the future period for all of India for these ecosystems. Now, how we're using this risk assessment to do the National Adaptation Plan is that, one, we are trying to understand what the likely future climate risks are, in addition to what these systems are already facing, the magnitude of it, or even the form of it. In many places, some of these risks historically may not be recorded, but in the future period, the likelihood of it actually happening is the reality. So we're considering that. Secondly, this assessment also helps us to prioritize ecosystems that are relatively high and very high risk.
Now, while we know ecosystem all across India, every piece is at risk, when we are looking at an adaptation plan, when you're looking at investments and actually kind of implementing, we need to prioritize. It's not easy to kind of come up with a plan where everything has to be attended to in one go. So which is why, while we do recognize that every ecosystem and every part is at risk, based on this modeling exercise, what is at extremely high and high risk are the ones that have been picked up, and then those have been prioritized for coming up with the plan. Thirdly, it is also helping us to identify the natural and human drivers of risk that have been identified for each of the hazards and each of the ecosystems and sub-ecosystems that have been looked into. And finally, using all this information, a set of adaptation strategies is what the plan actually has put together. So when you unpack the risk that has been done, you're looking at the hazard itself, and then we are looking at, okay, what does the impact of this particular hazard, which translates to risk, mean for a particular ecosystem and the subtypes that are being talked about, which are the geographies which are being impacted, and then of course, what is the risk? So when I say risk to the ecosystem, while I say there is risk of flood, what does flood mean to, say, a dry forest? What does flood mean to people dependent on the dry forest? So that way we've kind of tried to kind of delineate the linkages and then come up with a set of strategies. And then of course, we've also tried to inbuild and recognize that since people are dependent on these various ecosystems, whether direct or indirect, there are going to be impacts. So the socioeconomic impacts is also something that has been mapped together. So here is the forest ecosystem where a tabular form, it shows you how we've tried to map. Now I'll request my colleague Aparna to come in and walk you through how we've built the strategies for each of the ecosystems. So over to you, Aparna.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Indu, for setting the context. I'll now walk you through each ecosystem and how we've looked at the risks to these ecosystems under each of the hazards, the socioeconomic impacts, and then build on to the adaptation strategies and the action plans that we've developed for them. Like Dr. Indu already mentioned about the forest ecosystems, we've done similar exercises for the grassland ecosystems and the desert ecosystems. Like you see over here on the right-hand side over here is the grassland ecosystem, where for each of the hazards we've identified which particular grasslands or which particular deserts would be affected, where they are located based on the maps that we received, and the risks to these ecosystems specifically, like whether the biodiversity would be changed, whether the ecosystem itself would be lost in extreme hazards, and what are the socioeconomic impacts like reduced fodder or loss of livelihood, loss of tourism, and all those aspects. Similarly, this is what we've identified for the inland wetlands and the coastal and marine ecosystems all put together over here. One thing that I would like to highlight over here is, which was highlighted during our stakeholder consultations also, was that flood so there are multiple hazards which are probably required for maintenance of certain ecosystems. Like for example, flood is an important aspect of maintenance of wetland ecosystems, and therefore then how do you see what is at risk over here and how do you strategize for that? So that is also something that we've kept in mind while developing the adaptation strategies. So coming to the adaptation strategies, we've also mapped each of the hazard to different natural and human-induced drivers, and based on that we've developed the adaptation strategies. So over here, for example, you'll see forest fires. There are multiple adaptation strategies like fire management, scaling up of monitoring systems, capacity building, and sustainable forest management. And under each of them, we've developed certain action action plans, very specific action plans that are implementable towards that adaptation strategies. And we've also identified a few nodal institutions and organizations that could take this forward and do the implementation, whether in the short term, that is in the next 3 years, in the medium term, which is from 2029 to 32, and in the long term, that is 2033 to 2035. So these are a couple of like very specific detailed adaptation strategies and the action plans. I'll just walk you through the adaptation strategies for forests and for ecosystems and biodiversity in an overarching manner. So we've clubbed all of these adaptation strategies into these different baskets, like Dr. Indu already mentioned in the structure of the chapter. So for forests, in terms of the support and policy structures, in terms of institutional frameworks, a few strategies that we've identified, which are mentioned over here, are aligning it with the already existing financial structures in place. That is, one of them is CAMPA, Green India Mission, Manregas, and these will help finance or put a financial budget to these particular strategies. Promoting decentralized renewable energy, because then it specifically focuses on communities that are dependent on these ecosystems for firewood, and how moving away from that would then make them more independent. So therefore, implementation of biogas and improved cook stoves would help in that. Collaborating with the CDRI for climate resilient infrastructures. So again, disaster management, India is already leading in that. And then finally, strengthening the forestry institution and research networks. In terms of capacity building and community participation, again, that's a very important aspect, because we want to involve the communities that are dependent on these ecosystems in protecting and preserving these ecosystems itself. So identifying and conserving threatened species, a lot of traditional knowledge that exists within these communities can be used in that. Strengthening community conserved areas, biodiversity heritage sites, and sacred groves. There's already a lot of talk around giving these indigenous communities the legal rights to their own communities. Restoring landscape using native species and agroforestry, so not like recognizing the kind of species that are planted in these areas, and not just a blind afforestation program, but anticipatory plantation for these ecosystems. Promoting ecosystem connectivity and wildlife corridors, which then improves the biodiversity conservation aspect, and expanding mangrove plantation for coastal protection. So a lot of these adaptation strategies are designed in a way that they increase the adaptive capacity of the ecosystems itself. So if you have a stronger ecosystem, then the adaptive capacity of the people who are dependent on these ecosystems and of the ecosystem itself increases. Then coming to a few gender-sensitive strategies, water harvesting systems and community safety and legal protection. A lot of women face a lot of hardships in collecting these waters and going to larger distances, traveling longer distances to collect water. So giving them water harvesting systems and community safety. Promoting women leadership in forest governments, including them in how the community conservation needs to be structured. Again, sacred grove campaigns and integrating traditional knowledge, and livelihood diversification and training. So empowering these communities in what they are already practicing in these particular areas, and not just completely dependent on them. Finally, coming to infrastructure development, again, like I said, construct disaster resilient infrastructure, establish early warning systems, watershed protection, wetland restoration, and improve drainage. Coming to research and technological improvements, one thing that was very glaringly obvious when we did the literature review for the risk assessment was there is a dearth of it within the country, and therefore the first steps towards that would be mapping the ecosystems that are there within the country. So using GIS and remote sensing to do real-time tracking of the hazards, to prioritize degraded forests and restoration using spatial tools, expansion of the LTOE networks, which are the long-term ecological observation networks, to fill the data gaps, and so on. Then finally, coming to the financial mechanisms, like I've already mentioned, scaling up of Green India Mission and CAMPA, implementation of green credit program with dynamic land banks, which is already operational in certain states within the country, development of insurance schemes for forest-dependent communities, and empowering women with microfinance and training cooperatives. Coming to the adaptation strategies for the other ecosystems, again bucketed into these different categories. So for institutional support and policy structures, it might be a little repetitive over here, but recognizing the traditional knowledge in biodiversity planning, strengthening people's biodiversity registrars, collaborating with transboundary biodiversity conservation across South Asia, expansion of protected areas with climate-smart spatial planning, identification and restoration of degraded ecosystems for resilience. So again, we've tried to make sure that we identify different ecosystems and understand what those ecosystems mean to that particular area. So for example, a lot of grasslands being ignored and only going for afforestation is something that we've highlighted and tried to see that the grasslands are protected in their own right. There are other strategies that you can read over here: adaptive governance and at subnational levels, empowering the SAP-CCs, which are the state action plans for climate change, and the NB-SAPs to address biodiversity risk with clear KPIs. So the National Adaptation Plan would probably serve as a guidance document for the different states to develop their own adaptation plans specific to their regions. Periodically revise these plans using the ecological data and all the scientific literature that keeps coming up, integrating biodiversity evaluation into planning and budgeting, and enforcing ecological zoning using satellite monitoring. The capacity building and community participation involves training forest officials and planners and communities in biodiversity adaptation. An important thing that we've highlighted over here is establishment of a Center for Excellence for the adaptation planning itself, which will help in the monitoring and evaluation of these strategies and the implementation of them. Similar to the forest ecosystems, again, expanding of the LTOE networks for biodiversity monitoring. In research and technological improvements, again, development of early warning systems, mapping of these ecosystems, and expanding on the data, filling up the data gaps on the vulnerability and risk assessments within the country. In infrastructure development, again, creating on upgrading of green, blue, teal infrastructure for resilience. So all the different kinds of ecosystems are covered under that. Building check dams, percolation tanks, water harvesting structures in vulnerable areas, which can help them during drought and flood periods. Construction of cyclone shelters or elevated infrastructure in coastal wetlands. Again, these infrastructure development strategies are focused on very people-centric view, wherein the communities that are dependent on these particular ecosystems would face the risks. And then finally, coming to financial mechanisms, blue carbon markets, which is carbon credits for mangroves and seagrass conservation. Again, this would help implement the strategies and also create the funding for the same. Biodiversity credits, green credits, carbon markets to generate the funds for restoration, and development of insurance schemes, like I said previously, for the forest biodiversity and ecosystem dependent communities. And finally, payment of ecosystem services, which is already in place within the country, and the expansion of that, blending the financing instruments with reward conservation efforts. That covers all the adaptation strategies that we've mapped for both these chapters. We can proceed for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Indu and Ms. Aparna, for the detailed and informative presentation. Now we move on to a facilitated discussion and question and answer session, jointly led by Dr. Indu, Ms. Aparna, Dr. B.S. Adhikari, Scientist GWII, Dr. Gautam Talukdar, Scientist FWII, and Dr. Divakar, Consultant at MOFCC. We welcome inputs, reflections, and queries from you all.
Thank you, Ananya. And we all are here because we all have been contributing to the chapter in some form of the other. And a lot of people have provided inputs. Probably more than 50 people have provided inputs at various stages. But we thought that this would be a fantastic opportunity where many of the conservationists who are from ground, they would be able to give us suggestions, and hence we are here. So we are here to answer probably any questions that you may have or any suggestions that you may have, and we can assure you that we won't be able to answer all the questions. We can only take inputs, and wherever we can, we'll do the best. And the idea is that the nap doesn't become a typical napping session, but we actually get some productive inputs from it. So, are there any comments, reflections? So, sir, but we will also need closing remarks from you. So,
I think it was a very comprehensive presentation of what we would need to do. But I think we still don't know enough about how these ecosystems are going to respond, especially in different areas of the country, different biogeographic zones. How are they going to respond to climate change further? What will happen with temperature? What will happen with rainfall to those ecosystems? What will happen to species in those ecosystems? Will they be able to migrate or move fast enough to be able to survive in new locations? What happens if a species like the elephant has to move so that it moves into urban areas? I mean, these are the nuances of this. And I think what I've been interacting with IITM about this a bit, and I feel that we are still very fuzzy, more or less because we are so diverse in the country, about what exactly will happen where. We are able to say extreme weather events are going to get increased because we are seeing that happen. But there is much more to look at now, I think, to say what will the future look like. And perhaps in terms of ecosystems, we will have to look at changes in their structure, in their composition of species, in the very fact that water cycles and nutrient cycles will change with this. How do we look at this for making an adaptation plan if we don't really have enough data on understanding this today? I think that's the concluding remark.
So I'll just quickly respond. Right now, sir, we are doing something at a national level. And obviously, as Mrs. Dral as well as Kodali sir has already mentioned, that, you know, subsequently there would be these state action plan or state adaptation plans which will evolve. But the, you know, again quoting BC sir, we should call spade as a spade. We really don't know what is going to happen. And we do really need a lot of research. So even how the state adaptation plans will be prepared is a big question mark as of now. So, but I assume that, you know, the states will take up more and more research as well as more and more strategies which can help. And probably even National Biodiversity Authority, through its chain of command of biodiversity management committees, would be able to, you know, come up with some kind of plan. But Right now, we really don't have adequate information. Most of it is modeling, very little bit of experimental.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Barucha. This morning also we saw in the presentation, some of the findings which were reflected from Shola grassland were actually different from what we are perceiving as when the climate change would happen, as the more carbon in the soil is actually leading to more increase in the temperature. So absolutely right. That's why we are, emphasize, if I use that word, for continuous research and monitoring on those ecosystems, if you want to have really good information about how they are changing and what needs to be done.
I think what was presented, as Iraj said, is very, very comprehensive, and probably has prepared a roadmap of what is being planned. What I thought, most of the ecosystems has co-evolved with geological time scale, and probably has gone through multiple changes of climate from hot to cold and so on. And they have their intrinsic mechanism of adapting. And the concept at this point of time, we are not looking at a geological time frame. We are looking at a more Anthropocene time frame in which we will have to interact to. But having said that, I would also suggest a little bit of input into the adaptation plan, more preventive processes, rather than, it's an extremely well-documented curative process, but I think, a mechanism of little bit of preventive processes, what requires to be built in. May not be very large scale, but the reason I say that, the climate change is happening, and all of us are looking at that. In the coastal and marine system, it is the coral reefs which has actually shown that with the climate change, with the temperature rise, the bleaching of the corals, but even in the time frame of last 50 years, they have shown the resilience of reverting back, coming back. So I think having understood that even at a small time scale, some of the systems have the ability to come back on their own resilience. So I think, that's one reason why I say maybe a little bit of preventive, what kind of a natural preventive processes are there that needs to be built in. While I say that, so the other thing I would also like to be included in the NAP is, while this is largely looking into the MOEF and climate change ministry's input, there are huge number of other ministries' plans, rightly so, because we are aspiring to be one of the largest economy in the world, and therefore the plans of the multiple sectors would probably as a cross themes you have already talked about, will probably add on to the swiftness with which the climate adaptation will have to be required. So I think a little bit on to having a relook at the developmental agenda of the other sectors, okay, and how are they going to be adding on into the climate risk, because some of the other sectors' contribution will probably hasten the process of climate change also. So I think that also needs to be built into that. So I think that's, to begin with, that much is what I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for raising a very, very relevant point. And this is something we've been brainstorming, because what we put for forest or other ecosystem, it could be counterintuitive to another ecosystem. Likewise, what agriculture is doing could be counterintuitive, because all these ecosystems are interconnected. So while sectoral level plans are looking at only the sector, but the national adaptation plan that is going to be submitted is going to actually stitch all of these together. the high level points of each of these are going to be placed together to see how do they link with each other. So I think that's the endeavor, but I think it's a very, very important point for us to flag. And also, like Sir said right in the beginning, you know, we do not know how systems are going to react. Unfortunately, sir, the impact is something that is not understood at all. And the time scales that we are looking at is so small that we can't. So given that, I think the preventive measures, and then how do you make what we call as win-win measures, right? Something that may not lead to maladaptation. What are those things that we could potentially put in place? So we've tried to kind of pick those and pull in these aspects as far as possible. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to flag 2 points. Taking forward from what BC sir just said, at least some of the states have state-specific climate change action plans in place. I think Odisha was the first one, just because I'm from that state, I just wanted to flag this. Was done way back in 22, I think expires in 32 now, 10-year plan, possibly also approved by the MOFCC. And I think the only state who have done that. That is a result of a large-scale exercise in which convergence across sectors were carried out. It was Department of Science and Technology which had coordinated that. Would be a good document to look at, particularly I think enormous data sets, raw data is also available, must be available in this thing. Some data mining can be of use. Point number 2 is that in each of the states, there are nodal agencies, nodal departments that have been designated, because we look at it in the very narrow prism perhaps of environment and forest only. The implications on people is enormous, and biodiversity by the very nature of definition also involves communities living across, particularly in the coastal areas. A lot of data is also available with the disaster management plans developed by the state governments. So in which SRCs and disaster management plans developed by the states are there. That also could give you a lot of data to plug into the human aspects of adaptation plans.
Shall I? Anyone? So yeah, state action plans, yes, because we ourselves as an organization have been working with certain states in development of the state action plans. In fact, I contributed a part of the Odisha plan as well when I was with Indian Institute of Science then. Interestingly, I think while what you said is very right, but I think one of the key things, this is a national plan. It's a reporting requirement to the UN. So it's a guidance document. Now, when it actually gets into implementation, then obviously the state plans become the pivotal pivotal layer on which this has to be pegged. And you can draw inputs from that and then roll it out. So maybe we should kind of make a statement in the way forward or the roadmap potentially, where we could talk about what you said, how it needs to be taken forward. So we could do that.
Just flagging the point that instead of top-down approaches, bottom-up also, which has already been done from the states, would help in terms of looking at that portion.
So actually, we did look at the state action plans. And unfortunately, in the biodiversity and the ecosystem sector, probably only 4 or 5 states actually have got some reporting. Uttarakhand is, of course, one of them. Odisha is one of them. Probably, I'm not sure, Sikkim, Kerala. So, but rest of them, they don't talk about biodiversity and ecosystems at all. It is purely in terms of, how much amount of carbon you can sequester, and emissions, it's primarily related to that. And honestly, even in the IPCC, the biodiversity and ecosystems have just creeped in a few years back. Till before that, it was only in terms of, carbons and methane emissions, all those kind of things. So from the action plan, there is not a lot to draw, but there is an enormous amount of literature that we have looked into. But the suggestion given by BC sir is really very good. We always think about it, preventive actions. In fact, we do talk about, we should build with nature rather than against it. So, building embankments and all are, not the right ideas. Urban flooding is a major issue, which actually shouldn't be an issue at all. It is simply, we have blocked all the drainages. So those kind of things, we do need to work with the, Urban Development Ministry to actually sensitize them on how we should work. But of course, it has to be subsequently done in the state adaptation plan rather than the national adaptation plan. But we'll do make a statement, as she already mentioned, on taking it forward. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I would like to congratulate the entire team, various institutions involved. Important document, National Adaptation Plan. What I want to convey is that since I was involved in the preparation of the NBSAP and also the forest fire plan, so plans are coming, more and more plans. But what I would like, and whatever process, consultative process has happened, and whatever strategies was presented by Aparna, all are fine, good. But when I was doing this NBSAP and collecting very detailed information from all possible sources on ecosystems, and it is your ecosystem and biodiversity centric. So first of all, it is very important that the whole plan has to dovetail with your NBSAP, as well as with the very important component in case of forest fire. So forest fire plan. These are all prepared by our own MOEFCC. Then among ecosystems, forest largely, obviously the prioritization is required. Information for all aspects are now broadly available and documented even in NBSAP. But what I was feeling that the overall degradation of forest ecosystem in terms of now invasive species. We are documenting in document, but still I will say the desired priority has not been given. Even there might be all India coordinated project. Second thing, when I was writing and analyzing and reporting, the way small extent of inland wetlands are disappearing. The Space Application Center, ISRO, is providing information. They have done the decadal assessment on wetland, inland as well as coastal. But very carefully, if you see, the extent of, as well as probably the number of inland natural wetland is declining. That is worrisome. So that has to be now given highest priority by whatever means. Same way when I was doing the coastal marine ecosystems, so again, highest threat is on the coastal wetlands. And when you're talking of coastal wetland, even I will say the documentation on estuaries, lagoons are very highly scattered, maybe 10 years old, 15 years old, things like that. So particularly the ecosystem, sub-ecosystems within the coastal marine, the lagoons, the estuaries, by the time these plans are prepared and implemented, these are going. We know that there is a large project like Great Nicobar project, which is having a lot of controversy. So islands, lagoons, estuaries, mangroves, even we have ignored all through the sandy beaches and sand dunes in the coastal state. So these are the very, very small quantity extent seagrass. So these coastal intertidal zone and the type of impact is building every passing day is tremendous. So how we can generate more scientific information, proper databases, and this decadal type of change in wetland may probably not help us in inland wetland and coastal wetland. Probably the cycle has to be reduced to maybe 2 years, 1 year, 5 years. Otherwise, by the time 10-year decadal, and another thing which has happened and which I have documented, because the 2006-7 data for wetland assessment by ISRO, they have used list 3 data. But maybe to maintain comparison, again 2016-17 data, again it was the list 3. And I think by using list 3, you may not be getting the type of information you are trying to generate, the way the wetlands are disappearing. So I think that type of things, prioritization and other efforts are required. And another important thing is that when we are talking for last 15, 20, 30 years, since the inception of the Biodiversity Act, the state biodiversity boards were made, and the BMCs are also in now picture, how we are going to strengthen and improve their capacity is the challenge. And that should be one of the highest priority if we are believing in three-tier governance system. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And yeah, the document is comprehensive and we perhaps did not have enough time to show it here. But your concerns were also kind of were visible during the write-shops we had and the consultations we had. And there are challenges, we all realize that. And what we can do at best at the national level is to highlight those challenges and what are the things that should be prioritized. Exotic species invasion has been listed in almost all the cases of the hazards which are going to affect the ecosystem, because that's going to be the case. And I totally agree, despite knowing this, it's a big issue, big challenge in country to kind of regulate exotic invasive species. Little is being done, which is not showing any kind of impacts at the larger scale, and so are the other issues that you raised. What we can do at best is, I mean, all of these documents do that at least, to heighten the level of understanding and perhaps what needs to be done, perhaps re-emphasizing the things. When this document is taken down from here to state level, when the nitty-gritties of the geographies come into this, I think that will be a time to perhaps strengthen those issues which perhaps will not be visible at the national level.
Thank you, Madhur sir. I know that you are a lot of hard work done in NBSAP preparation. Your inputs are well taken. Regarding, I want to answer your BMC's capacity building. Ministry is right direction going on. Yesterday also I conducted a meeting with the National Biodiversity Authority, our Additional Secretary, particularly BMC capacities. You are planning for giving funding, how to approach, and you are planning for biodiversity conservation scheme is there. You have to preparing a new scheme. In BRs also, BMC's transition zone, the BMC's people, you have to capacity building. You give funding from Biosphere Reserve scheme also you are planning now 26 onwards. These are going on, sir. Definitely that is important point. I also understand because I joined 1.5 years in looking after BMCs are very weak sector. You have to build up the capacity building. That is main important because ABS regulations are already notified. Then BMC's capacity is very important. Certificate of origin, issuing of certificates, all these things. Thank you for your contribution in NVSA particularly. Okay.
Slightly digression from what you asked, sir, basically extending it a little further, we also discussed a lot in terms of, financing. It's not just about the, the problems that are going to come. From where do we get the capacity to resolve these things and where do we get the finances from? And it has been one of the biggest challenges in this particular sector, ecosystems and biodiversity. How do you put the money value? We really don't have any benchmark. Like, you say that corals are bleaching. So what would be the cost of transplanting corals for the entire, western coast? We have no clue about it. It's really mind-boggling figures which will come. And because I touched upon coral, I also want to appraise you, sir. We went to Andamans very recently. Most of the corals in Andamans are kind of currently bleached at this point of time, about 85 to 90%. That's the kind of estimates that people are giving, not just in Andaman, but globally. So things are really challenging. We don't know. In a very short span of time, things can change and we don't know the costs that would actually be involved in terms of reviving certain systems and whether we can revive them at all. We may well cross over the tipping point. Yes.
You mentioned that you don't know the cost of coral transplantation. What would it take WII to have a small project to find that answer?
So exactly, these are research that we need to do. We really don't know. So we need to take up research, and the moment we tell anything ministry that we'll have to take, they'll say, okay, 3 years, abhi 3 saal jo hai. We don't have that much amount of time. We want to give the report, and these are our timelines. So maybe, and that is why I'm putting it up to the House. So anybody who has got information on any kinds of cost, please get back to us so that, you know, we can add certain kind of ballpark. We did add ballpark figures. We have, and I don't know whether those ballpark figures will be accepted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No,
I would like to just make a comment. So maybe WII needs to have a team which anticipates these questions and plan 3 years ahead.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
I just wanted to just give an example. I think, you know, you specifically on the coral reef restoration, there has not been a lot of case studies in this country. There has been, and most coral restoration case studies are mostly restoring the branching corals, not necessarily addressing to the other lot of corals. I have been running a coral restoration project in the Gulf of Kutch, on the westernmost part of the Gulf of Kutch. It's almost 15 years of work, and it's an extremely slow process, extremely slow process. And interestingly, I think, you know, you addressed about, you know, how do we bring in the private sector? And this is a model, it's a PPP model. The money actually comes from the private sector, and they are keen because it's on their own backyard. Because initially they were blamed, probably they are the people who are responsible for loss of the coral in that area. Not necessarily that was true, but in the last 14 years, we have some kind of an assessment of what it cost to bring X amount of area under coral restoration. And currently I was looking into these 3 projects, Coastal Resilience Project, which is going on in Maharashtra, Orissa, and West Bengal. And Maharashtra has identified only 26 hectares to be restored, coral area to be restored in the state of Maharashtra. And the kind of budget that is being given is huge, really, really huge, because the time scale that would be required for coral area to be restored, no one has any idea actually whether that is going to happen or not. Again, if you go back to the Gulf of Kutch, the historical perspective of Gulf of Kutch, the coral growing base has been completely removed by the cement industry, which was using that as the raw material. Now, to create that base itself on which you will start growing the coral will probably require a huge amount of time and also huge amount of investment. So we actually started doing artificial reef by taking basalt stones and so on. And in the last 10 years, we have 10-year class segments, and we are trying to see whether actually the corals will start coming back on that. In 10 years, we have not seen anything coming as yet. We have taken corals and created coral gardens and started restoring. We are now just bringing in new technology like coral fragments growing and replanting them. But these are all still experimental at this point of time in this country. There is hardly any restoration. And to be honest, I think in one of the most preventive, natural preventive process of sea water ingress onto the land, the nature has provided that, sand dunes. What have we done? We have flattened sand dunes. Now we are talking about restoring sand dunes. How are you going to do that? That's another $1 million question. But also the interesting part is we have Indian rare earths. We are looking for radioactive material removal. The guideline clearly says you remove sand, but you restore that area. If you examine, not a single area has been restored. Reclamation is not happening. I think no, in paper everything is there. In practice it's not happening because that is one of the reasons we don't have any estimate. But it's extremely important. I was very happy to see the sand dune has also been pointed out. But are we in a position, and that's a preventive mechanism, are we in a position in the next 10 to 15, 20 years, at least bring in some sand dunes back? I have been actually dealing with Orissa State. I'm trying to take on a small pilot project. In the country, we have only one sand dune sanctuary. Again, that is in the state of Orissa. Balukhand next to Puri, 65 kilometers. The only sand dune sanctuary in this country is in the state of Orissa. And we just wanted to take on a small area. Can we restore the sand dune? We don't have any example. So how can we are going to come up with what kind of a financial requirement is there. So I think these are interesting questions, but also this takes us, where are we missing? Where can we take our next step forward? I think it's an interesting case study. It is interesting to see what else we can prioritize. Even I think we probably need a national level shift, the way we are looking into our sand dunes, the way we are looking into our planning, the way we are now looking into our river development. We know that the high altitude snow are melting, and they are going to bring in a huge amount of water on the river. But we are already trying to retain the rivers on both the sides, not allowing the water to go into the floodplains. We don't have floodplains anymore. So I think, nature is our best teacher. Can we, nature-based solutions we are talking about, but are we practicing our nature-based solutions? Are we looking into the floodplains and their role, how to control the climate change related changes? I think, no, this is something which you need to be addressing. Are we requiring a policy shift altogether? That's something which I want to say.
I just have a comment. As all of us know, biogeographic 1 and 2, Trans-Himalaya and Himalaya are highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change. And we are also aware that the Government of India through DST is coordinating the National Mission for Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems. 6 task forces, WI is one of them. I think considerable amount of energy, even information has been generated since 2015. DST also prepared status of health of Himalayan ecosystems. So with some documents, and some states have their own national state action plans for climate change. So some of these plans and the inputs that these task forces has given back to DST for the NMC program, and ICIMOD's work, including a lot of publications, and IWISE, for example, have outlined several strategies and plans. I just wonder, I think all of them have been consulted and incorporated in the document. If a draft is circulated to all of us, I think many of us would like to have a look at it and then provide inputs if required. Thank you.
Dr. Gautam, you were just mentioning about finance thing now.
Yes, sir.
During NBSEP thing, see what I realized doing this NBSEP work and understanding that interrelated planetary emergencies or crises, the biodiversity loss, the climate change and pandemic and diseases. And now we have finished the NBSEP, now we are doing the climate change adaptation plan. I think it is the high time, when the 16th Finance Commission is currently on, our ministry should try to impress upon that Finance Commission, the central hub of the next commission, because I remember 20th, 30th Finance Commission, when we started getting in our country the disasters. So they set aside a huge amount of money for disasters, disaster reduction, disaster prevention, disaster management. And that is the reason that we are having NDMA, NDRF, SDRF. And it is the high time for the country like our, with most populous country, poor country and other things, that the whole theme, the central hub theme of the next Finance Commission plan should be biodiversity and climate change, which are interconnected. So how we can impress upon is important.
Kodali sir, can we impress on the climate, the Finance Commission?
We have to do it, but actually 6th Finance Commission already started, I think. 6th Finance Commission already, they are in the process, I think, in the process.
So can we push on to them?
Oh, we will discuss it. Actually, it is a point NBSAP also, when you are planning, same thing was Madhur Saab study, trusted, but actually NBSAP implementation, you are follow the convergence with other schemes. I think mostly funding for other ministries, line ministries, 23 line ministries, where they are having schemes for implementation, you have to funding for from that. You are now getting, I think, GBFF, Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. Some India got 13.82 million, that is almost 100 crores. You are using for NVSAP implementation and target. This is the first range. Next range also, there is a, recently I attended Chile on meeting, Biofin meeting. There is a proposal, India may get another $10 million for that. You are using that money for it.
Feel is that the secretary or our own honorable minister, they should avail with some top-notch expert from biodiversity or climate change, at least an opportunity to meet the commission and give the letter and delegation.
I think we all second that, and particularly when the government itself is now talking about ecosystem-based approach. So why that cannot be now taken as a kind of center of arguments about what development has to be done? Should make a good case about that.
So, are there any other comments? Yeah.
I can use this. No, I just wanted to react to the last two discussion points on, first of all, the existing work that sir was talking about, which DST and NMC and the SAP-CCs. So I just wanted to highlight firstly that, sir, a lot of the work that was done under NMC and the SAP-CCs was considered in the last adaptation communication which India submitted to the UNFCCC. So this was done 2 years ago, and where all the existing stock taking of adaptation, resilience, the existing policies, what is being done under the different missions was undertaken. So that was also a consultative process, and that document is available on the UNFCCC website. And the NAP is now a second step, which is more looking at the planning. But like you rightly mentioned, due consideration is being given to all the existing schemes and plans. For example, the strategies that are being developed. This is also linked to financing. I will not comment on the Finance Commission part, but for the financing of the strategies that the NAP is looking at, there is a dedicated working group which is tirelessly working towards, first of all, estimating what the resource requirement is for the NAP for all the 8 sectors, and then looking at incremental costs, technological costs, capacity building costs in a future scenario as well. And then also trying to identify what the sources of finance could be. So from existing government schemes, but also a lot of focus is being given to the private sector, how blended or innovative financing approaches can be undertaken for all the sectors, including ecosystems and biodiversity. So just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. I think we are almost at the end of time, and Bharucha sir, your final comments, please.
Yeah, I'll try and summarize what has gone through. One is that I think we need a new type of climate hotspot type of look at ecosystems not as what they are today, but what will happen in the next few years, I think. I mean, we mentioned coral and coasts and whatever. Those are the very obvious ones. But I think the important thing is the cross-cutting ones with agriculture, animal husbandry, which is for food security, my own thing, medicine, what is going to happen with this is, it's mind-boggling what will happen with ill health due to this. And the costs will be enormous to manage that. I don't know how we will generate enough finance, generate enough medical professionals of that type who can deal with this. And I think that cross-cutting thing is very important. The other thing is there are going to be obviously some increase in the number of threatened species that we have, both in flora and fauna. And that, I think, becomes very important. If threatened species go on increasing, how are we going to deal with them? Then are we going to start thinking of ex situ conservation programs now in those that are likely to be more vulnerable? And I fear for flora nowadays. I know people have been laughing at me, कि ये flora में कैसा घुस गया, but whatever it is, I feel that that is the base of this thing, and we'll have to look at that. The other thing is, I mean, species and ecosystems are going to evolve, and there will be change. I'm sure that the change will be so slow. Looking at back history of geological time, we're going to do some drastic thing there. I don't know how we will deal with that, especially again in the agricultural crops, livestock breeds. We may have to completely change our ideas on this. What is a livestock that we want now in terms of climate change? But I thought one of the missing things was a plan for capacity building measures made now. And I don't know whether it's there, I might have missed it there, but I think you need a plan for capacity building, which we do now, at least a sort of framework of what we do with this. And that then should link with what did come out, research, education, healthcare, poverty, whatever, and link it to that. But we need a capacity building program. And I think that is something that perhaps we might look. People talked of finance, but everybody talks of finance. The damage is going to be so incredible that it's scary. But I believe in the resilience of human beings and their ability to respond. But this is going to be very difficult in the time scale that we are envisioning. It is also now important at this stage to say who will do what. If we don't do that now and say who will do what, we might miss the bus. So this super plan is there now, and I think it's a super plan. And how do we link that to capacity building, and who is going to be responsible? And from I think they should be involved now, rather than once all this begins, and then we start saying, अरे देश ये organization ये कर देगा, वो ऐसा कर देगा, industry में ऐसा होने चाहिए. It's better to do it as a preventive measure. Somebody did mention that, but it has to be very specific into planning capacity building. And BMCs, well, I've had to deal with BMCs, so I know what it means. But we need, and that's something I did for Maharashtra State Biodiversity Strategy Plan also, that we needed, BMCs cannot build capacities on their own. You need to give them the background on how to be able to do that, and they're willing to do that. That is what I found. So it's been a very nice session. I'm just the unfortunate one who has been told to round it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for those comments. And yes, capacity is an integral part of the plan, so it's been well taken care of. The challenge is, getting people involved right now, organizations and institutions involved right now, because, it's a top-down flow wherein after this national adaptation plan, you have state adaptation plans, and then the district, it has to flow down. So that's going to be a challenge. We really don't know whether we have that time. So, thank you.
Thank you all. To conclude now, I would like to invite Ms. Soumya Bhatt, Project Specialist at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP India, to deliver the vote of thanks. Ma'am, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So after the end of a very enriching and thought-provoking discussions, it is really my privilege to deliver the official vote of thanks. On behalf of the entire team that is involved in the development of NAP, from WII, from UNDP, from MOEFCC, from CSTEP, and all the other experts and consultants. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, especially to Ms. Ruchika Drall for her continued guidance, and also for steering the NAP for the ecosystems and biodiversity chapter, and also for his technical leadership and active engagement in shaping this chapter. Thank you very much, sir. I would also like to express deepest appreciation for the Director, Wildlife Institute of India, and also the Dean of Wildlife Institute of India for hosting this session, and for also providing a very engaging platform for different stakeholders to connect and engage on this very important topic. We are also grateful to Dr. Indu Murthy and Ms. Aparna from CSTEP for really providing and doing all the technical work in collaboration with everybody and coordinating with different institutes, presenting the chapter, writing the draft chapter. A special thanks to Dr. Gautam Talukdar and his team, Dr. Adhikari and all the others for excellent facilitation for organizing this session today. Your facilitation and moderation really helped in ensuring a participatory and insightful exchange of views. Then last but not the least, to all the participants, thank you for your enthusiastic participation, your feedback, your engagement. All this input will surely help in ensuring that the NAP and the ecosystems and biodiversity chapter in particular is grounded in the local realities while also contributing to the global climate agenda. So once again, thank you everyone, and hope you have the rest of the sessions, engaging rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Just before you all break, we do have a small token for 3 of you. Dr. Indu, Aparna, and Som for being here and doing.
With this, we formally conclude today's consultation. I sincerely thank you all for your presence and your valuable inputs. Now we break for tea. Thank you all.